How many times have you promised yourself you'll try a completely new playstyle only to backtrack to the stealth archer because it's the best build in the game? We force ourselves to play the most optimal way, but then we suddenly realize the game feels completely hollow. Games have a lot of unique elements, whether it's the gameplay, the atmosphere, or a beautiful crafted world to explore, but what can actually ruin that for us is to a certain extent an information hazard. Everyone can think of a game they remember from a childhood, how they discover solutions and items, without looking on the internet or knowing the most optimal route for a specific part, and when you finally solved it, you felt this massive wave of joy. You love those moments, and I think that's a core part of any game, but nowadays, I feel like people often turn to wiki or guide or other sources and look up a bunch of stuff around the game, whether it's the ending, the best quest solution, or optimal builds. This approach to some extent ruins the experience, as it ruins the idea of how developers intended for the game to work, to be experienced. Because sure, you might say it's a single player game, so I can play it however I want, I can even cheat and so on, which is a completely valid approach. But armed with this knowledge, we have to ask ourselves, why am I even playing the game? A massive part of gaming is exploration. If I immediately look up online that there is a sword or the best armor just a short walk away from the start that will carry me through a good chunk of the game, I am faced with a choice. I either ignore it or I take it. But I can't shake the knowledge that it's there, so I'm basically forced to interact with it. By doing this, I'm chilling my experience, because I will never have to interact with other weapons or armor, robbing myself the mechanical side of the game. It's the same with the mini-games or puzzles. If I immediately look up how to solve a puzzle, I'm robbing myself of developing my cognitive thinking, but more importantly, of the feeling that I figured it out myself. Or better yet, take a strategy game like Stellaris or any of the Total War games, where a huge part of the experience is the roleplay that naturally happens to you. Playing these games require critical thinking and heavy decision making. Will I bind my ruler to a chair so they can become immortal, because she's the one who united my empire before it went to the stars? Or will I let her die and face a civil war? Or here is given a better example. I have lost a war and become a vassal to another empire. Will I continue to play and see how it goes, or will I load an older save and solve it more easily? As I pointed out, most of these problems can be avoided simply by loading the game, but constantly reloading and changing your strategy removes the thrill of clawing your way out of the bad situation and earning that truly satisfactory victory. I think that feeling of overcoming a difficult obstacle is a core part of the experience, and looking up the best solutions to scenarios completely ruins the magic of exploring the unknown. Similar things can be found in story-driven games. You rob yourself of the experience and break your immersion because you're literally looking up interactions and finding out who's going to betray you. From a gameplay perspective, you could adapt to that on your next playthrough, or maybe discover a new side quest that could offer something fresh, but by looking up where everything is, you are seeing that from yourself. Because when you look all this up, you're no longer trying to immerse yourself in the game through its internal logic and world, instead you are just trying to optimize the outcome as much as possible. As one Soren Johnson said, given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. If I had to give an example, I would bring up a Baldur's Gate 3. It's a game that runs on the D&D rule set heavily modified for a digital game, so it's easy to grasp. Even if you look things up for the rule set, here you can't ruin it for yourself that much. If anything, it might just encourage you to experiment more, which the game fully supports through its respect system. The real reason I use Baldur's Gate as an example though, is how the game offers you multiple paths to take, and ways to approach things. The game literally wants you to give it time and surrender to it, rather than just rushing to the finish line. I have around 500 hours in the game, which if you look at how long to beat, roughly equals 5 or more full playthroughs. Most of the time I ended in Act 3 though. But because I didn't look anything up, the entire time I was playing every single playthrough felt unique and focused on exploration. Sure, on my very first run, I think I scoured the entire first act and didn't leave a single stone unturned. But subsequent runs were completely different. How would I react to a drow or an elf? Depending on my race, I will have some early parts of the game easier. What if I completely skip the Underdark and go straight through the mountain pass? Or skip the exploration under the monastery and go straight to the Moonrise Towers? Or what if I jump into this giant hole where I fought this big spider? How would the game look if I created a character bio and acted strictly according to that character's ambitions? This brings me to one of my latest playthroughs in Baldur's Gate. I created a character based on Sebille from Divinity Original Sin 2. Knowing how she acts forced me into a deep roleplay mindset. I already knew the optimal outcomes, but at every turn I had to ask myself, what would Sebille do? It created a highly unique experience, even if it wasn't the best way to play. All of these things hold a weight, because as a player who enjoys the game and plays it their own way, there is an insane potential to sink hours into it, meaning you spend significant time on one game, which speaks volumes about its quality, rather than just looking it up online to see what it would look like. Being right there in the moment, exploring it in your own skin holds a real weight and value for the medium itself. Sure, you may make some bad decisions during your playthrough, you are dealing with the information you have at the time, and things might go badly. But that's why sometimes the first playthrough is the absolute best. You have a deep emotional investment into characters, because you don't know their fate or how they will react to you. If you already knew their fate, you don't feel the urge to treat them well. The same goes for exploring the world through pacing. The game slowly introduces you to its systems and mechanics. If I look up where everything is and how to do it perfectly, I lose that sense of growth. When I mentioned those puzzles earlier, games can hint at where to go through atmosphere or visual clues. I want to go to that building, or that camp over there, because it looks interesting, or I would rather keep my distance, because it may be dangerous. If I already look up where everything is, I might just tell myself that going there is completely pointless. I lose the motivation to explore off the beaten path. But stumbling into a harder location and having a tough time can actually be highly lucrative for your progression. Letting you overcome a hurdle, you basically set up for yourself. I'm experiencing this right now with a game I'm currently playing, The Outer Worlds, an amazing RPG by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm looking up almost nothing about it. Some characters might not have a completely clear motives, or I might have read a character differently than someone else. What seems like an obvious choice, for instance that a character who appears to be a good guy, trying to help others, may turn out to be an elitist who would leave them to die in the wilderness. Or you are trying to find a middle ground between rebelling factions to secure a future for their colony, and honestly, you might not even reach some of these moments or their best solutions on the first playthrough. But the moment I look that best solution up, I'm not really making a decision based on what the game is telling me or how I actually feel. I'm just following a checklist made by someone else. Instead of me playing the game and experiencing it, I'm just following a blueprint on how to handcraft the best outcome. This is where the information hazard creeps in. It might not give us the best experience, and it actually downgrades the game as a medium, because if you remove the risk of making a bad choice, you have removed the very thing that makes it game in the first place. Sometimes, living with the consequences is just more interesting, but again, it's up to everyone. You can always reload a save, go back and change your decision, but at least you are acquiring that information yourself, through your own gameplay. Of course, there is one major argument here, fear of missing out. A person doesn't necessarily want to play a game 3 or 6 times like I did with Baldur's Gate 3. They might want to experience absolutely everything the game has to offer, and 100% completed it, at least in terms of quest content. And that is a valid approach. After all, single-player games exist so the players can be their own masters. Well, I think it sometimes goes against the game design, to each their own, and how they want to play. But there is an interesting exception to this information hazard, and that's the soul games. These games basically operate on community suffering. The community can leave messages, or you can watch how someone died. However, looking up information on how to kill a boss or finding the most optimal path can slightly diminish the whole concept of world exploration. So, taking advice from other players in these games is actually a form of offline multiplayer, let's say, and sometimes it can lead to funny moments, or lead you to a trap and kill you, so you need to be careful with who you trust. So with multiplayer, it's a bit of double-edged sword. Games like Classic WoW can have their benefits if played with just a little bit of information hazard, or depending on how metagaming is used. Because the feeling of exploring and wandering around Azeroth is incredibly engaging and great for player immersion. And if you find people who view the game the same way, it's awesome. But the problem arises when a player queues into a dungeon through a dungeon finder system, or joins an activity that is public and not a guild activity. Without knowing the meta, you can easily piss off other players. In modern WoW this is somewhat solved because groups can specify what kind of run it is, whether it's relaxed, casual or competitive. This creates a bit of space for players to explore at their own pace, but WoW is largely divided into categories PvE and PvP. In PvP, it's heavily reliant on knowing the meta, and the same goes for games like Counter-Strike or Dota, where knowing important mechanics and positions is mandatory. But even then, in WoW, once you learn the necessary mechanics, you can get a good overview of what you want to focus on, and then start experimenting. Same goes for Dota or Counter-Strike. When meta knowledge is required, not having it usually leads to a toxic experience. You don't necessarily have to know smokes, positions, or boosts honestly. I still don't know half of them to this day, but that lack of knowledge has often led to negative experiences, and leaves an unpleasant impact on your overall gameplay experience. So as I said, knowledge in multiplayer often becomes a player's obligation. Well, in single player game, you can only ruin things for yourself or your body if you are playing a co-op game like a Baldur's Gate 3 or the Divinity Original Sin game. In multiplayer, you are ruining it for John the Dungeon Finder, who just got off a hard shift, queue up for a public dungeon in WoW, and is in no mood to watch a tank who can tank or a healer who can heal and keeps dying. But the hazard goes deeper than just how we play. It's built into how games are developed now. A real shame and key problem in WoW, for example, is data mining and the PTR. Developers release public builds so the players can test them, but it means everything is discovered before it even hits the live servers. This completely kills that aspect of community discovery that could last for weeks. If the PTR was limited, we would actually have to solve things together. It would make every update feel massive, like a sudden drop of the unknown. And honestly, those sudden drops would be awesome. Look at the recent Counter-Strike update where reloading means losing the rest of your magazine. Sure, it doesn't affect me that much personally, because I use my own unique arsenal of weapons, but it injects a sudden raw meta into the game. Even if it's relatively small, you suddenly have to think more about ammo management and not just shoot blindly into a smoke unless you grab a negative, of course. In the end, we can completely shatter our gaming experience with information hazards. When I know where everything is, acquiring it just becomes about solving a mathematical equation. I'm just executing something that was handed to me. If I decided to play alone without guides or the internet, I might not get the absolute best ending, I won't know if a companion is a traitor or if a leader is faking it, but I conquered the game based on my own judgment, with my own analysis of the situation. Nobody is backseating me, and that feels so much better. Plus in co-op, there is a real reward in just being close together. When you and a friend have to solve a problem using only the clues the game provides, it becomes a purely shared adventure. That back and forth debate what to do next adds a layer of social depth that guides simply can't replicate. Of course, there is a downside to playing completely blind that I mentioned earlier, fear of missing out. It's one of the biggest negatives of modern gaming. It's hard not to feel the pressure to keep up when everyone else is already at the end game, essentially forcing you to rush to the finish line just to stay in the conversation. In multiplayer itself, it's more of a double-edged sword. When I play with friends, we can joke around and play our own way. But then, when I play with someone more experienced or with randoms, I have to be a bit more considerate. I need to be aware that not everyone has tons of time to play, or maybe they just want to play a standard run and enjoy it. So it's important to think about who am I playing with. Fortunately, you can always find communities that want to take the game slow, explore, and experiment together. Ultimately, it's up to you. It's your time you are spending. It's just not about reaching max level or getting the best endings. Games are above all else about the experience and the journey. Anyway, thank you for your attention. More content to come, though not guaranteeing similar quality.